Welcome to the tutorial for AlphaLab's portfolio menu. This is where you take the strategies that already passed the quality filters and combine them into a diversified portfolio, optimized by 5 different objectives, ready to promote to live trading. We'll go through every box, every button, every chart, every metric, and every table column, one by one, so you have no doubts. The portfolio menu builds and compares portfolios optimized by 5 objectives. You choose the mode and the weighting and promote to live. At the top is the row of parameters that control how the portfolio is built, and to its right the rebuild portfolio and promote to live buttons. Below that, the row of optimization modes. On the left, the weights chart and the strategies table. On the right, the big panel with the equity curve, the drawdown, and all the combined portfolio metrics. And at the very bottom, the export and import buttons. Let's start with the parameter row. The first parameter is target size, the number of strategies the constructor aims to put in the portfolio. I say aims because it may end up smaller. If the correlation or maximum drawdown filters reject candidates, the final portfolio will have fewer strategies than you asked for. The range goes from 2 to 20, and the default is 7, which is a good balance between diversification and manageability. Max MDD% is the hard limit on the combined drawdown of the whole portfolio. It's a critical parameter if you trade on Darwin X0, because Darwin X rejects accounts that exceed 10% drawdown. That's its kill switch. That's why it defaults to 10%. If you want to play it safe, lower it to 5%. If the combination of strategies exceeds this ceiling, the constructor rejects it and iteratively drops strategies until the expected drawdown falls below. Min DSR is the minimum deflated Sharpe ratio a strategy must have to enter the portfolio. The DSR is a Sharpe corrected for the number of trials and for the skew of the returns. In other words, a Sharpe discounted for overfitting. 0.25 is the gate minimum. 0.40 is already in the top decile, and above 1 is extraordinary. This is one of the portfolio's real selection criteria, so don't lower it lightly. Max PBO is the ceiling on the probability of backtest overfit. The probability that the backtest performance is the result of overfitting rather than a real edge. The value of 0.50 is the classic Lopez de Prado gate. Above 50%, the strategy is more likely to be overfit than robust. If you want an even stricter portfolio, lower this value. The constructor only admits runs with PBO below this ceiling. Max absolute correlation controls diversification. As the constructor picks strategies, it rejects any candidate whose absolute correlation with an already selected strategy exceeds this threshold. The lower you set it, the more diversified the portfolio, because you require the strategies to move more independently from each other. This is what stops you from stacking 7 strategies that are really betting on the same thing and all crash together. The default is 0.50. Risk per trade is the dollar risk of each trade, expressed as a percentage of the initial capital. The position size is derived so that, if the stop loss is hit, placed at 2 times the ATR, you lose exactly that percentage. 0.5% is the balanced default, 0.3% is the conservative choice for Darwin X0, and 1% is aggressive. Be careful with 1%. A book of 10 strategies running in parallel risks around 10% drawdown, which is exactly the kill switch. This row of 5 buttons holds the optimization modes, the 5 objectives the portfolio can be built with. Robustness picks the least over-optimized strategies, weighting 60% on DSR and 40% on 1-PBO. They are the ones that best resist overfitting. Our over-DD seeks the best return per unit of drawdown, using the Kalmar ratio, which is return divided by the absolute value of the maximum drawdown. Profitability seeks the highest absolute growth, without penalizing drawdown. Balanced is the all-in-one composite, 40% DSR, 30% 1-PBO, and 30% Kalmar. It's the default balance between robustness and return over drawdown. And Sharpe rewards the best volatility-adjusted return, the bar-by-bar consistency. The key point: a single rebuild computes all 5 modes at once. Then you click each button to see the book and the metrics for that objective. The Rebuild Portfolio button reruns the constructor with the configuration you set above. The process is, first it filters the strategies that pass the gate and meet the minimum DSR, and the maximum PBO. Then it does a greedy decorrelation, picking strategies that are weakly correlated with each other. Next, it computes the weights. And finally, it applies the Darwin X drawdown ceiling, iteratively dropping strategies if needed. The result is saved to the file runs portfolioactive.json, and it builds all 5 modes at once. To the left of the button is a progress bar. It shows idle when at rest and fills with the percentage while the constructor works. The Promote to Live button takes the portfolio to live trading. It promotes the mode you have selected, the highlighted button, together with the weighting you chose in the panel, default 1% or optimize CalMAR. On confirming, it writes 2 files, portfoliostate.json, with the active set and the strategy queue, and rankinglive.json, with the best parameters of each strategy. These files are read by the daemon, the rotation menu, and the live monitor on their next refresh. But note, Promote does not start the daemon. After promoting, you have to go to Live Monitor and click Start yourself. This bar chart, Portfolio Weights, shows how the capital is split among the strategies in the portfolio. The weights are chosen to maximize the portfolio's CalMAR ratio, that is, the CAGR divided by the absolute value of the percentage drawdown, with bounds between 2 and 40% per strategy, and the sum always adds up to 100%. This CalMAR optimization replaces the old HRP method, which gave up to 78% of the capital to the least profitable strategy just because it was the least volatile. Each bar shows its percentage above it, and the colors change with the weight so that at a glance you can see which strategies dominate. The chart is recomputed every time you click Rebuild Portfolio. The table at the bottom left lists the strategies in the active modes portfolio, sorted by weight from highest to lowest. Let's go column by column. Hash is the strategy's position in the leaderboard menu. It tells you which ranked strategies the portfolio picked. If the strategy is no longer in the ranking, it shows a dash. Symbol is the instrument, for example EURUD or USDN, and TF is the time frame, H1, H4, or D1. Score is the score the leaderboard menu shows for that symbol. It is recent activity over the last 3 months, not the portfolio construction criterion. That's why it can be 0 for robust but quiet strategies. DSR is the deflated Sharpe ratio of the same run that is in the portfolio. This one is the real selection criterion, together with PBO and CalMAR. Gate is the pass or fail verdict of that specific run. The constructor only admits runs with gate pass, so here you should see pass in every row. If you see fail, that slot comes from an old portfolio, and you should rebuild. Status is the operational state. Active, operating normally, worn, no new entries. Frozen, closed. Weight percent is the fraction of capital allocated to that strategy. Sharpe is the Sharpe of the deployed strategy's full backtest. And MDD percent is its maximum drawdown. With these columns, you see at a glance which strategies form the portfolio, why they were chosen, and how much each one weighs. The big panel on the right has 2 tabs that change how the portfolio's performance is presented. Default 1% assumes each strategy operates in parallel, risking 1% per trade on the same shared $100,000 account. The bar-by-bar returns sum across all strategies, with no capital split. It gives the highest return, but also the highest aggregate drawdown. Optimize CalMAR, by contrast, splits the capital maximizing the CalMAR ratio, that is, choosing the weights that maximize CAGR over the absolute value of the percentage drawdown, with bounds from 2 to 40% per strategy. This is the weighting that replaced the old HRP. The tab you choose here is the one that gets promoted when you click Promote to Live. Right below the tabs are the combined metrics of the whole portfolio, scaled to a $100,000 account. The header states how many strategies there are and the account size, and next to it a badge with the Sharpe and the label Darwin X OK in green if the expected drawdown is within the limit, or Darwin X exceeds in red if it exceeds it. Then the metrics column, total profit, the total profit in dollars, yearly average return, the average annual return, and CAGR, the compound annual growth rate. Next, Sharpe ratio, the volatility adjusted return, profit factor, gross profits divided by gross losses, and return over DD ratio, the return over the drawdown. And finally, win rate of trades, the percentage of winning trades, MDD, the maximum drawdown in dollars, and percent MDD, that same drawdown as a percentage. These last 2 in red, because they are the losses. The lower part of the panel is two charts sharing the horizontal axis, which is the bar number. On top, the equity curve. The thick red line is the combined portfolio, labeled portfolio, and below it run the soft colored lines, one per individual strategy, so you can see whether each one adds or subtracts. The dotted gray line is the peak or high water mark, which tracks the historical maximum of the profit. The gap between that dotted line and the red line is, literally, the drawdown in dollars at each moment. The legend at the top lets you identify each line. Below, the drawdown panel shows in filled red the portfolio's declines in dollars from its peak, so you can see at a glance the depth and frequency of the losses over time. At the bottom right are the buttons to transfer the portfolio between AlphaLab installations. Export Portfolio generates a file with the .alphalab extension that contains the strategies, the weights, and the ranking, so you can import it into another AlphaLab, for example on your VPS. Import Portfolio loads one of those exported files. It first shows you a summary and asks for confirmation, because the import replaces the current strategies, and if the daemon is running, it restarts it automatically with the new portfolio. The file carries a checksum, so if it is corrupt or from an incompatible version, AlphaLab rejects it with a clear error instead of importing damaged data. And that's the whole portfolio menu. In short, tune the 6 parameters at the top: target size, max MDD, min DSR, max PBO, max correlation, and risk per trade. Click Rebuild Portfolio to build the 5 modes. Compare the objectives by clicking each mode and looking at the metrics and the equity curve. Choose between default 1% and optimized Calmar. And when you're happy, click Promote to Live. Remember to then go to Live Monitor and click Start so the daemon begins trading. In the next videos, we'll cover the rest of the menus in the same detail.